All right. Well, I show 10 o'clock in the morning, so I'm sure others will be joining in as we talk, but let's go ahead and get started. Want to welcome everybody to our first club meeting of 2021. And unfortunately, we're here via Zoom, but fortunately, we're able to get together. So we have a couple of things of business to take care of first thing today. And then we'll turn the rest of the time over to Rick Mead, who has our presentation. So a couple of things that are going to be hitting the website really quickly is we are working on enhancing and growing our participation in the different committees that we have with the club, and we need your help. And so if you are interested in helping out, in giving up some time and to learning different facets of actually keeping our club running, I would encourage you to go to our website. The sign up sheet will post in just a couple of minutes, and giving us your name and number and what committees you're interested in serving on. We are actually spinning up a couple of new committees for our group. They may not be brand new, but we're definitely reactivating them. One of them will be an Elmer's cadre. This group of people are not expected or to be the Elmers of all things. But what we are asking is for a group of people to come together that are willing to talk to our members and talk to other hams in the community to find out who would be interested in being an Elmer in different topics and subjects. And then as we get requests, which we get a couple of requests a month for some Elmering, that you will be the ones that will get those requests and then match up the person requesting the help with an Elmer, and then just following up on that relationship to make sure that they're getting the help that they need and that they're wanting and that kind of thing. So that's one of the newer committees that we've got that is on our list. We also have a request to put together what we're calling the education committee. With things happening via Zoom and us not being able to get together as easily, the officers and I were talking about different ways that we can help support the radio community throughout our area. And what we were thinking is that if we can get some like-minded people together that are either good at finding curriculum or creating curriculum on different topics like one-on-one classes, how to use your radio, how to make your first QSO, how to whatever, that if you're able to help build that or find that curriculum and then either present it yourself and be willing to put together a schedule on that so we can bring people together, or we even have the ability to spin up an e-learning type site where you can put together your curriculum there on the site and people can sign up when they choose to and either do it self-paced, or you can use that as the go-to place and put together an online learning class. So if that could be a lot of fun to be able to put that together and to be able to build that and be able to support the community in that way. And then the third group that is really exciting, that everybody's excited about, is the possibility of building that HF remote station that Greg mentioned last month. So we are putting together a committee, and if you're interested in serving on that, please sign up. That is going to spec that out, look into the best practices of building an HF remote station, and then how the members would be interacting with that, along with the budget, so that we can see some progress made on that idea and that benefit to club members. There's lots of other committees out there. We're also looking for a photographer and a videographer to be able to help us with videos for how-tos and that kind of thing. And just somebody that likes to take pictures so that we can memorialize the events that we are able to take part in, to catch hams in action. Those pictures will be used on our website, social media, and also in some print advertisement, that kind of thing that we are planning for the year. So that's just a handful of different things. We do have chairman for many of these committees already, and we're just looking to add to their toolbox so that we have more resources, so that we can spread the load and become more involved. Any questions or comments about any of the committees? If you do, unmute yourself and holler. Okay. All right, so with that, let's turn some time over to Gary Johnson at 7D&D, and he's going to review what our tentative budget is for 2021.
Well, thank you, Larry. I'm kind of reusing what we did last year, and the budget that I found last year, I used less than half because of what's going on, and it says in our club bylaws that we're supposed to budget and have things ready to be used throughout the year. So having the two accounts as we do, one for the store and one for the club is budget is fed by generally dues and those kind of thing, donations. So, and the things that are used for is box rent, our corporation. I have to go rent parks for different things. I went to rent Bountiful's Park for our swap meet on last Monday, and they told me I can only have 10 people. I said, okay, I'll rent it for 10 people. That will all change by September, I'm hoping. Box rent just keeps going up and up and up. So along with the parks, we have to license our trailers. I got that all taken care of. We have taxes we have to do, PayPal expenses, War Wagon, and along with repeaters. I'm going to budget in some money for that because you never know what's going to go on. But that covers everything but the store. That's my day to day. If I have to go down and buy a new book to keep the paper and everything going, or if I have to go buy ink or something that might be miscellaneous, I've done that. So last year I budgeted $2,000, and I had well over $1,200 left of that $2,000 because we didn't do a whole lot of anything. So I'm going to pay that forward to this year, and I'm still going to budget again $2,000, and then see where it goes, and then I'll make the adjustments as the days and the months go by, and at the end of the year I will go ahead again and let you know what I spent the money on and how it was spent. And we're doing it a little different. We used to use checks, and we used to use cash and that kind of stuff, but I'm trying to make sure that everything is up and up. So we're using credit cards, well, debit cards, and I'm keeping track of everything. And so we're in good shape financially. And I did the books for the end of the year, and we're in really good shape for 2021. So anybody have any questions they'd like to ask me, or I'll be happy to answer anything anybody has.
I have a question, Gary. It's Hall, KC7RAF. Is the proposed remote HF installation, is that going to be a separate budget item so that there will be monies budgeted for this year to at least go as far as we can, or whatever?
Well, I've got a CD that's it's coming up for renewal in March, and there's probably enough money in that CD that we can do that remote station. And so I was going to do it on a 6-month rather than a year. I really need to know what the committee wants to do and how much I need a cost number. I need a real number before I can budget. But the original number that was set out there was between $5,000 and $7,000. And based on talking with Gary and Logan, that's a little high. So I'm just going to sit on that CD, and I'm going to use that CD for that project, and we'll see where we go at that point. But I need some real numbers before I can do much with that. So that being said, does that answer your question, Hall?
Yes, thank you, Gary.
Anybody else have any questions they'd like to ask me? I see Gerald Hasey's on there. Gerald, we got your money in the mail this morning. Anybody else? Any questions before I turn it back to Larry? Okay, back to you, Larry.
Great. Thank you, Gary. Gary does a great job of keeping us all straight on the funds, and he definitely protects the funds of the club, and we couldn't do it without him and his diligent work every year, making sure that we're on tap, and he keeps it straight. But if you ever have any questions about what the club is spending money on or anything like that, give him a holler, send him an email, and he'll set up a time with you. For major expenses, we do bring that back to the club, and that will be the same with this HF station. As things get more locked down and we know what direction we'll be going, that proposal will be presented to the club and then ask for your ratification for that so we can move forward. Any other questions or comments about the budget or committees or anything like that? Awesome. So on our call today, do we have any new members that would like to introduce yourself? Remember to come off mute. All right, hearing none. How about anyone that in the last couple of months have upgraded their license? All right, it has been the holidays, so if those type of things slow down, I do want to thank everyone for your continued support of our club. I don't see Greg online yet, so nope, I don't see Greg online, but I just wanted to publicly thank him for his years of service as our club president. He served as the club president from 2017 until December 31st, 2020. Did an amazing job, great job. We will be presenting him with a certificate and a gift card for his service, and we'll take a picture of it and make sure we're 6 feet apart or wearing masks, but we'll get that to him within the next couple of weeks. So wanted to let you guys know about that. All right, any announcements for the club before we turn it over to Rick? Yeah, Joan, go ahead and take yourself off mute and go for it.
I just have a little report. You were asking me to do a little report on Aries. Sorry about the barking dog. So just a few numbers here. Mike, KD7MG, one of our net specialists, reported that we had 3,084 check-ins in 2020, which is significantly higher than we have had in the past. So either they had nothing to do and they were staying home, or they just gained some people, but we did gain some people. On an average, we have about 95 regular check-ins with about, say, 3 to 6, maybe sometimes more or less, new people or visitors. Many of them became members this year. As far as our members, I have 136 on my contact list. Most of them are active. There are a few that, haven't told me to please get rid of their contact information. So that's a good sign. Maybe they'll be around to help if something happens. And we had about 20 new members this year. Most of them came from the Storehouse ERC group, which I encourage because I feel they're an asset to our Aries group. And that worked really well in our response for our wind response activity incident in September. The cities of Bountiful and Centerville worked with the ERC and with Aries in a joint venture. And Gary and 7DND and Greg, K7UHP, were guilty of making that happen. So kudos to you guys. And I'm hoping that we can continue that kind of interoperability in the future, because that's a big step forward. And I think it was a good year. We gained some members, and in spite of COVID, we got some things done. So that's all I have. Unless there's any questions, I want to hear Rick's presentation.
Anyone have any questions for Joan? All right, hearing none, we will go ahead and turn the rest of our meeting over to Rick, who is going to present to us information on HF antennas. And the show's yours, Rick. It's all yours.
Thanks, Larry. And I'm going to ask you a couple of times to confirm that things are showing up correctly on the screen, especially when I get ready to start sharing the screen, because I do have a presentation I want to go over. Excuse me. I wanted to preface this, however, by acknowledging that I am not an expert on antennas. I have been on this journey for a very long time, and I have always been fascinated by antennas. My background, when I first got my amateur radio license, I'm going to show you a couple of books here from back in the day. But when I first got my license, I was actually learning through electronics in high school a lot about the theory of radio, Colpitt's, Hartley, Pierce oscillators, how they worked, how you created single sideband signals. And that all made sense to me. But as soon as it got to the point where I was trying to figure out and understand how radiation actually occurred and how it worked and antenna efficiency, that was a harder one for me to really understand, primarily because of the math involved. And I had to take a lot of things on faith. But back in those days, and I will share with you, this is the, and hopefully this is showing up, this is the Radio Amateur's Handbook from 1966. This is the one that I first got when I was studying to get my license. And at the same time, because I was so interested in antennas, this is the ARL antenna book, also from 1964. This one is. This is, if I remember right, it's not got the number on it, but it was only $2 at the time. So I wish it was still that cheap in today's dollars. As many of you may know from my experience, I actually went to radio school and military, and during that time and with work, my license lapsed, so I was getting back into the hobby again in the 80s. And once again, this is the 1982 antenna book. There's a good section in there on the handbook. There's a good section in there on antennas. But again, as always, you always have to have the current antenna book available. And so I had that as well. And more recently, getting back into the hobby for the third and final time, I've got the references I'm using for today, besides online, is the 2018 handbook, and then also 24th edition of the antenna book. And part of what I'm excited about with the current versions of the information that's out there, everything that you can pick up online as well when you're getting these books. So it's fascinating to me to go back and kind of go through things in order to see how they have improved and changed, and the more information that's out there, especially that's online. So with that said, I wanted to let you know what I'm planning on going over today. I want to be talking about HF antennas, not necessarily only HF, because a lot of what I talk about will be applicable to VHF, UHF, and others as well. But my intent was to go through and kind of share with you some of the interesting things I've learned along my journey so far. And as I said before, I'm not an expert, but this is one of the areas that I spend a lot of time researching, studying, and learning more about in order to be more effective in being able to both set up my home station and also to be more effective in setting up a station when I go someplace remotely. So with that said, I'm going to switch over here and share my screen, and I've got a little presentation we'll go through here. So bear with me just a second. And let me take this one and change this over to here. So can you see that okay, Larry?
Yep, it looks great.
Okay. So this is an amateur radio antenna overview, and what I wanted to do is go through and talk about antenna efficiency and some of the concepts that you'll run into as you're going through your work and you're reading things with respect to antennas. The first thing I'm going to address is one here that I've had some conversations with various hams about. Does an antenna have to be resonant? And the answer is no. And what I want to do is share with you, and this is, I've always believed this, and for a number of reasons, but it's actually in the previous two antenna books that I had, it wasn't specifically addressed. But in the 24th edition, it's got an insert on page 1.6. And I've got it up here on the screen, but I'm going to read the entire insert to you just as a framework for where we're going to begin. An antenna need not be resonant in order to be effective radiator. There is, in fact, nothing magic about having a resonant antenna, provided, of course, that you can devise some efficient means to feed the antenna. Many amateurs use non-resonant, even random length antennas fed with open wire, transmission lines, and antenna tuners. They radiate signals just as well as those using coaxial cable and resonant antennas, and as a bonus can usually be used on multiple frequency bands. It is important to consider an antenna and its feed line as a system in which all losses should be kept to a minimum. That last phrase is the most important one, I think, in looking at antennas. So again, looking at things as a system, you need to understand the components, both of the antenna itself, how it was designed, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later, and then also some information on the feed lines and some of the things that you need to be aware of as you are setting that up. So let's start with feed lines for just a minute. And the difference between balanced and unbalanced, because I know that this is a conversation that a lot of people, especially when they're new to the hobby, have to work through and learn. So on the left side of the screen, what you've got is my depiction of an unbalanced, or I'll also say asymmetrical coax line. The intent of that little circle with the dot in the middle is supposed to be an end view of that coax. And then on the bottom, excuse me, it's showing the coaxial cable. And I've added a ground on that, and I've done that for a reason that will come through in some of the other discussions we have later on in some of the following slides. But the important part of the coaxial cable is to note that, number one, it is coaxial, which is where the word coax comes from, meaning that both of the conductors have got the same center of axis. You've got the hard core in the center, there's a dielectric around it, and then you've got a shielding that comes on the outside, which is intended really to do two things. It provides the other path for current to flow, and it also shields the antenna from outside noise and interference. That's the intent of it. The other on the right-hand side is ladder line or twin lead. And ladder line and twin lead are in fact two different things. Ladder line was the older version that was typically made by hams, especially in the early days when they would actually run wire and have it actually go through sometimes wooden spacers and separators. And some of that ladder line would actually look like a ladder. It would be fairly far apart. And then the size of the wire is also important in understanding things such as the characteristic impedance of a feed line. But the important part to note here is that on the twin lead, I'll call it that for this one, it's balanced and it's symmetrical. And the reason it's balanced is because the current flowing in one leg of that is matched by the current flowing back the other direction. In the coaxial cable, it is unbalanced because there is something potentially included in that called common mode current. And the reason that's there is because on the coaxial cable, especially when you've got something attached to ground, what you are doing is you are introducing another coupling component. In this case, we're talking about going to ground, which will introduce potentially other current paths to flow from that signal. Okay, so characteristic impedance is another component to be aware of when you're looking at your feed lines. The first one is coax, which is typically 50 ohms or 75 ohms, depending on what you're using. Twin lead is typically 300 ohms or 450 ohms. And again, this is determined by the physical makeup of the feed line of itself, the size of the wire that's being used and the distance between the wires and the separation. And also the dielectric that's used. In twin lead, that's typically air, which is between the two lines. In coax, you've got the dielectric inside, which is usually some sort of PTFE foam or something like that, in order to provide insulation and separation. So what is common mode current? And for this one, what I'm going to do is talk about two different names for current that flows along a coax. One is differential mode and the other is common mode current. What you'll notice on this one is that there is on the left, there is a red line and there is an I sub C, which is the common mode current. And what will happen in a coaxial line is if common mode current is introduced, and it can be introduced in a number of ways. This can be noise, this can be something that's generated from the outside, it can be something that's generated because of a mismatch of impedance between your feed line and your antenna. And then the other one is differential mode current, and that's the current that actually does the work in the circuit. That's what you want to see maximized, and the common mode you want to see minimized. And the reason for that is that you'll notice that that's additive on the top for the outbound leg, and it's actually impeding the flow of the current coming back, so that the total current is potentially reduced if you've got common mode current. And for more information on this particular topic, I will refer you to Kirchhoff's law, which talks about current flowing in electrical circuits. So where does it flow? For RF frequencies, and this is something that's interesting, and I had to think about this long and hard before, especially when I was younger, before I kind of wrapped my head around it. For RF frequencies, the current flows on the middle conductor and on the inside of the shielding. This is due to skin effect. Typically, your common mode actually flows on the outside of the shielding. So one of the things to think about when you're using coaxial cable is that you've actually got three conductors running in that coax cable. You've got the center conductor, and then you've got the RF that's running on the inside of the shielded side, and then you have got other currents potentially flowing on the outside of the shielding. Now, some of that can be affected by the actual thickness of the shielding, how many woven layers there are in that. But that's typically the way this thing gets modeled, or the way the current gets modeled and the way it operates. Okay, so antenna efficiency. Efficiency is the ratio of the power radiated by the antenna to the power delivered to the antenna. That's the, I'm going to make one other small, okay. So once we do this, then the question becomes, okay, so what are the components of that efficiency? One of them is line loss from transmission lines. I know that everybody has looked at the specifications for coaxial cable and twin lead line. And one of the reasons a lot of hams like to use twin lead is because it's got a much lower loss characteristic than coaxial cable does. And then you've got loss from coupling components. If you've got anything that is an antenna tuner, as an example, or if you've got a balun, or if you've got any other components, even if it's a lightning resistor or what have you, each one of those components in that flow, that circuit flow from your transceiver to the antenna, can potentially cause loss. And then you've also got loss from impedance mismatch. And this is probably one of the bigger ones that we have a tendency to work through, and we don't necessarily understand all of the components of our antennas that we're using, especially when we get to some of the off-center fed dipoles and some of those kinds of antennas, and how to appropriately match that impedance and do it in an effective way. So impedance coupling, how does this work? Okay, the first one you've got is a balun, and that stands for balanced to unbalanced link. You've got those that come in a 1-to-1, which is basically would typically go from 50 ohms to 50 ohms. You've got the 1-to-4 or the 1-to-9. And those are used for various operations depending on the kind of antenna that you're coupling to. The main function of a balun is really not to necessarily match impedance, but it is to suppress common mode current. And I'm going to have a reference here at the bottom. If anybody saw the presentation that I did of the homebrew stuff in December, I was showing you one of the baluns that I was winding, and it's a 1-to-4, but based on what I learned in listening to and searching designs for baluns from a gentleman by the name of Peter that's on TRX Bench, and the testing that he did on that, he's got a good design for a balun that actually does some very, very good common mode current suppression across the amateur bands from 160 meters up to 10 meters. And by good reduction, what I mean is more than 20 dB reduction across all of those for the common mode current that was introduced. The other one that you've got is transformer, which is typically used for end-fed wire antennas. And for those of you that can think back a year ago from December, the homebrew that I presented at the club then was for a end-fed transformer that I wound. And I actually was able to use that antenna at Winter Field Day when we went out to Antelope Island and set that up. And that antenna worked really, really well. But that's also for impedance coupling. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about end-fed wire antennas when we get down towards the end. Then the next of these are all the various network interfaces for impedance matching. L network, which is normally used for single band. It's a higher impedance. The higher impedance needs to be on the shunt side of the circuit. It usually requires high capacitance value, and it's normally used for a single band matching. In other words, it doesn't work over all the bands effectively well. Once it's designed, those components are really designed for a specific band. The next one is a pi network, which is more flexible than the L network, but may require higher capacitance values. This is just, again, the reality of the design for that pi network. And the last one that I've listed here is a T network, which has got more reasonable component values. It can match a wide range of impedances, but the design of this network is very lossy. In other words, you're going to use up a lot of the power that you're sending as part of this matching network if you're running through that. So that's sort of again, the key part of what we're trying to do here is make the antenna as efficient as possible, and we're trying to get rid of losses, and impedance matching is one of the main areas that we can effectively leverage in order to be more effective with creating that system of feed line and antenna connecting to our rigs. So then the question is, when you look at an antenna, is it a balanced or an unbalanced antenna? Balanced antennas include things such as center-fed dipoles, Yaggies, quads, delta loops, hex beams, and so forth. Unbalanced antennas are verticals, OCF dipoles, and mobile antennas. And again, this is just by the design of the antenna. Anytime you've got something that requires a ground plane or the ground in order to provide the rest of the circuit for the antenna itself, or does not have current flowing equally in both legs of the antenna from its feed point, you have got an unbalanced antenna. Does that mean it's good or bad? No, it doesn't. It just means you need to be aware of that as you are figuring out how you want to attach your feed lines to those antennas. So, a center-fed dipole in free space has an impedance of 73 ohms. As it becomes closer to the ground and other opportunities for coupling become present, impedance lowers. So as you get a dipole and you bring it down, it will become closer to 50 ohms. And if you get it very close to the ground, it'll fall even lower than that. The impedance, which a lot of people want to be able to match to, is resistive only at one frequency, and if you as the frequency moves either above that or below that, the impedance becomes complex, meaning that there's a reactive component that's introduced, either capacitive or inductive. You can model it using EasyNIC. I have started using that. I am not very good with EasyNIC just yet, but it's something that I need to become more familiar with because I'm going to learn. I know I'm going to be learning a lot as I begin modeling some of the antennas and some of the pieces that I'm putting together. So that is just another opportunity to learn, and is part of the journey that I'm currently going through right now. So dipole antenna, and this is one that I want to talk about for just a minute, just to give you an idea. I'm sure everybody has seen a diagram such as this that shows an antenna, dipole antenna, and shows both the current and the voltage waveforms across that. And again, one of the things when I was younger that I did not understand about this particular view of an antenna is, okay, this would be taken at a point in time, but it's going to continue to ebb and flow and change throughout the entire cycle of that waveform that's sitting on that antenna wire. And as I began to
I'm listening.
Okay, as I began to understand more about what this picture is representing, this is showing not current and voltage across the life cycle of the waveform, but something called the voltage and current potential. And when I talk about voltage potential here, that's different than the electromotive force, or what we consider voltage. And this is derived from something that is called lumped circuit analysis. And I'm certainly not going to get into that here because that's both beyond my capability to explain well. But I have read a lot about that, and it's really a modeling aspect of electronics that lets you describe circuits and the resistive and the capacitive and the voltage components of them as a higher view of it, rather than the specific operational at a point in time view.
Rick,
yes.
Quick question.
Mm-hmm.
So what you're saying is that this curve here represents voltage or current at an instantaneous point in time.
That's correct. It will be at an instantaneous point in time, but as far as the attribute of the antenna is concerned, this becomes the picture of voltage potential. So in other words, if you look at the feed point, this is where you would be doing the calculations for the voltage potential in order to determine what the actual voltage and current was at the feed point, rather than, and so in other words, it's viewing potential rather than the actual voltage itself. And if I try to go further than that, I'm going to get myself lost in you as well. But
what you're looking at the feed point is a kind of a statistical average. That's all I need to say about that. That
is a good way to look at it. There are some other nuances to this that are interesting to explore. But I do appreciate that question, because this is one that when I first saw this, I said, why do they always show it this way? And it's because of that lumped circuit analysis view of a dipole versus, I mean, you could technically, in a period of time, slide the current, left and right across that feed point, and you're eventually going to see all of those. But for purposes of analysis and calculation, this is the view that makes the most sense for a dipole. Chuck, does that get you?
No, yeah, that's kind of what I thought. I was just kind of confirming. So thank you for that.
And so one of the things to then look at with the dipole, and these are calculations I would suggest that you consider doing with any antenna that you're dealing with or that you're operating with, and I'll talk about some of those reasons as we get through this. But for this particular one, if you, knowing that if you're going to run 100 watts up to this antenna, what you're going to find here is that on this antenna, that 100 watts will, at the feed point, it turns out that the calculation is you're going to be having 1.17 amps at the feed point and 85.44 volts at the feed point as well. And you can calculate that just by using, going from the power is P equals I or IE, Ohm's law, basically, and then solving for either voltage or current, and then figuring that out with and replacing one of those in the E equals I times R, Ohm's law equation, and using 73 ohms, which is the dipole in free space, and you will end up getting those numbers. For me, the more interesting one then to calculate is using the Q of the antenna, which can be given, and you can pick that up. You can actually utilize that in order to calculate the voltages on the ends of the dipole. And for 100 watts, the voltage at the end of that dipole turns out to be 568 volts RMS, root mean squared. And I bring that up because I want to make sure that people are always being aware of the kind of power that's sitting on those antennas. And I know that looking at radiation and the effects and making sure you're doing your station analysis on a regular basis every time you make a change, which is something that they ask you to do from the FCC. But just know that those voltages are out there, and you don't want to touch the end of the darn thing when you're keying it. It becomes a safety factor, and it's something to be aware of because for all of the obvious reasons, you can't shield your antenna. You can't put a Faraday cage around it because then it would sort of defeat the purpose of having an antenna. So just be aware that you have got those things that are out there, and especially if you're looking at a vertical antenna and keeping kids and dogs and people away from that just from a safety factor. RF
burns hurt and they don't heal very well.
No,
don't ask me how I know that.
I know. We had when I was in high school, the first time we brought out a Tesla coil, and we're looking at the sparks going out there. One of the students in the class thought that's really cool, and reached up to try to touch the spark because he thought it was like a Van de Graaff generator. It might just kind of pop over, but that burned a hole right down to his bone, and was a. And you're right. It takes a long time to heal. So,
as another quick aside, this I suspect is something that we need to probably pay a little more heed to when we actually get around to going out and doing field day again together. Because if we're putting up slopers and some other things where there's a potential to brush up against something, just something to ponder for later.
I think you're absolutely right, Chuck, and I totally wholeheartedly agree with you on that one. Okay, so there's a dipole antenna. So things to consider. It's important to understand both what you want to accomplish, the design points of the antenna that you plan to use. You're going to set up your antenna, especially if you're going out mobile. I thought a lot about this as it relates to Aries and being able to put up an HF capability to get out in the field. Because I can use my end-fed, but I will set it up differently if I'm trying to maximize NVIS for short-range communication versus trying to get communication going further away. And that and also how to set up that end-fed antenna again and do it in a way that is safe, because you can actually use, and I have done this with my end-fed, you can use it without putting a ground in and without using a counterpoise, and it will work really well. But it's not the safest way to operate. You've got to make sure that your feed line is staying away, because you're actually using that feed line as the counterpoise when you don't have a counterpoise sitting out there on the end. And depending on whether you've got a current or a choke balun before it gets into your radio, you're potentially presenting things into your operating shack that you need to be careful with. And I know a lot of hams that do that. In the military, we used to do that. We had communication bands, and one of the first things you were supposed to do when you were setting those up, even before you hooked your portable generator to it, was to drive the ground rod in, wet the ground where you put that in, and connect the wire to it. But there were many times that we operated it without that ground rod in place, and that's just not safe. And that's just laziness and poor operating practice. And I'm trying to get better at that when I go out in the field myself, and making sure that I'm putting those other components in place in order to create a more safe operating environment. A lot of people know this, some do not. A G5RV, the feed line, is part of the radiation for the antenna. That is a component that radiates when you're looking at that twin line where it comes down. A Carolina Windham or a Windham antenna is actually a vertical antenna. It is the feed line where it goes up to that termination point and to that ballon. And so it's actually like a vertical that's been flipped on its head. And so you've got your counterpoise up in the air. And
are the horizontal radios acting like a capacitive pad or something?
Yes, they are. And a matter of fact, I'll bring this up now because this is the magic of a T antenna. And I want to talk about this one only because when I was first learning about antennas, and I saw a picture of the one on the Titanic, and I was interested in spark gap, looking at some of the history, I thought, wow, that antenna is really cool because look at how long radiating arms are up on the top, and that's got to be the feed line that goes up, and they were just using bare wire. And it wasn't until I actually learned about that T antenna that the aerials that go across the top of that antenna is really just a giant capacitance hat. There's current flowing oppositely and equally in both legs of that, which is basically charging and discharging the capacitor all the time. So that's really a vertical antenna that is going up, and that's what actually does the radiation. Many people aren't really aware of that. And so it's important to know of whatever antenna that you're using, how it's intended to be used, and what the various points are on it. Now, at this point, I also want to talk a little bit about off-center fed. There's a really good article on understanding how an off-center fed works and how to be able to effectively use it for multiple band operation if you've got an 80-meter OCF. And there are, depending on where you decide to set your feed point, and I know a lot of people will just basically, this is what I do and I have done before, and I'm going to be doing some experimentation when the weather gets better with moving the feed point of an OCF that I've got in my backyard to different locations, because depending on where you place it, you can operate on more bands more effectively. It's not going to be perfect for many of the bands, but as long as, when you go back to that graph I was showing of the dipole, if you map across an 80-meter dipole those current paths for various frequencies and where they would sit on that antenna wire on a standing wave, any place that you've got decent current showing up on that graph, you can use that as a feed point for that band. And when you go across all of them, it turns out that someplace between 20 and 25% becomes a good place to feed that antenna in order to operate on more bands, or at least be able to tune up and get a signal out on more bands and be able to do that reasonably efficiently. And so the thing that I want to experiment more with, because if I can find one that I can set up and be able to utilize that as an OCF on multiple bands, along with my NFED on multiple bands, I'll just have more operations when I go out into the field. And again, think through your setup and view it as a system. That's the main message I think that needs to be looked at all the time. So resources that are out there, and ones that I've used in getting information for this presentation, obviously the ARRL antenna books, all three that I've got and any more that you've got, and the online resources now that you can download as part of that are excellent. TRX Bench, Peter has got a lot of good videos out on YouTube, and he's got 4 that are on nothing but balance. And as I mentioned in December's presentation that I did, I would highly encourage Anyone that's interested in common mode current to go out and watch that, because you will learn a lot about common mode current and see the actual testing he does in his test bench of that. Hamradiosecrets.com has got a lot of good information on antennas and other things relative to radio. And K0BG.com has got some excellent information on many aspects of amateur radio use, and is a great resource. And I'm not saying that these are the only ones. And also to put in, and I didn't plan this, Larry, but go to your local Elmer. That's another great resource, and find somebody that knows about what you're trying to do or is willing to go explore it with you. Because many times if you get an Elmer, you just find somebody who's researched some other things and will help you research the question that you've got, and you'll both learn something in the process. And
hey, real quick question for Larry. Can we post this deck up on the website? I don't know if there's a routine way to do that or not, but it'd be great.
Yes, we are recording this, and it'll be posted on the web after the meeting.
Great.
Yeah, and Larry, if you'd like, I can send you this deck as well. It's in the keynote on Mac, but I'm sure we can figure out a way to get it something common. And then the last thing I'm going to put down here is find an antenna analyzer and learn how to use all its features. And you probably know a fellow ham that has one. And if you're looking for a fellow ham that has one, I am one that does. I've got a matter of fact, only because I with them so much, I have got this one that I picked up recently, which is the Rig Expert AA600. This thing is fantastic. It is awesome. It lets me hook up to my computer. I can do a lot of analysis, search down problems of feed lines and other things with it, but it gives you a lot of good information about everything that you've got connected to your rig, and you can look at some of the losses that are there, the return loss and what have you, which is all, again, part of what is important when you're doing that. And then also this MFJ, which is the model like the 269C Pro, and I got this one mainly because I wanted to be able to also do UHF, VHF, with both of these will do. But they are both excellent tools, and will help you as you learn to use more of these functions. You're going to learn a lot about how various lengths of feed line behave, whether they're capacitance or inductive in the way they are viewed on either end, either when they're opened or shorted, and you'll find a lot of other good information about that.
Rick,
yes.
I don't know if you've seen them yet, but you can get on Amazon and Fleabay and a couple of other places these vector network analyzers, anywhere from between $50 to $100, and actually for the money, they're absolutely amazing.
They really are.
And they're a little bit more fiddling. They're not quite as cookbook as the two devices that you showed us, but you can hook them up to your PC and do all kind of stuff. There are several folks in the club that have them, in fact, they are so inexpensive, Larry. Potentially, they might not be a bad idea to keep one or two in the bookstore. It's just a thought, but in any case, that's another avenue too, because there's continues to be updated firmware and a lot of other things, and people are doing pretty fantastic things with them, and they're good up to about, depending on the one you get, up to about 2 gigahertz. So. And they have a built-in tracking generator and a bunch of other stuff. It's pretty cool.
They are, and I'll just tell you that if you want to see how one works and you don't have one, go out to TRX Bench, because that is exactly the device that Peter uses when he's doing his test setup for those balance to look at generating the common mode current and looking at the suppression on it. So those VNAs are really fantastic little devices. Okay, and that is the presentation that I've got. So I'm going to stop my screen share. And I will just say in closing that I hope people found this useful. not necessarily because I told you anything that you didn't already know, but because you may have been encouraged or motivated to go out and do some more research and possibly find places where I'm wrong. And then come back and tell me. But it's again, this was meant to be an overview, and again, this is just a snapshot of a few things that I have found interesting that I have told a lot of hams and so forth with as I've mentored some as they've been coming up through the ranks. So there you go. And with that, I guess I'll open up for questions, or Larry, if you want to take the time back over. Either way.
I was just going to say, does anyone have any questions for Rick? I see Hall showing us something on his screen. What are you showing us, Hall?
This is a one of
Oh,
the
there you go.
network analyzers that he was talking about.
Yep.
Really big device, but the preceding this, they were roughly $12,000 to $25,000 lab instruments. These are not quite that good, but very close. Mm-hmm. And for $50, you know, it's an interesting tool in the gadget box.
Totally agree, and thank you for showing that, Hall. I appreciate you having that there to show. That's on my list of things to get, but I'm able to continue using those other devices for right now, and especially with that Rig Expert, because I can hook that up to my PC as well, and in order to look at graphs and do some more things and control it with that.
Any other questions or comments for Rick?
I'd like to add one.
Go ahead.
Chuck and Hall were both talking about the device. There's another piece that goes with it that's a board that is very excellent. For one, it makes it calibrating your device more understandable, I think, but also allows you to see what's going on with the different features of those devices. Just a PC board that's got connectors on it so you can hook it up to your VNA. And I have found that a great learning device for me, as well as a help in calibrating the VNA for use.
Mm-hmm.
Great, thank you. All right, one more round. Any other thoughts or comments? All right. Well, thank you so much, Rick, for your time with that. I do enjoy your presentations. They're very thorough, and they give me a lot to go back over in the next month or longer to see what I've missed as they were going through. But appreciate your time very much.
My pleasure.
So with that, just a couple of real quick announcements for you. We are working on our next month presentation. With any luck, we will have a presentation on the intertie. We're working on confirmation of that right now. And in 2 weeks, or a week from Tuesday, actually, so that would be the 19th, we will have another TechNet, and Joan is going to join us on that TechNet to talk about ARES and emergency communications. So there'll be more information on that posted on the web in the next week or so that you can tune in on the repeater and be part of that conversation. We have officially uploaded to the website the sign-up sheet for anybody that's interested in working with one of our committees. Remember, you do not have to be an expert to join one of those committees. If you're interested and willing to learn and give us some time, that's what we're looking for. So are there any other general announcements or anything that anyone would like to bring up that you thought about during the meeting? Go ahead and come now with your comments or suggestions. Okay, not hearing any. Thank you for spending an hour with us today. Appreciate all of you guys. Try to find a way to be on the air. Use our repeaters. Get radioactive. It's a lot of fun. There's a lot we can do with our hobbies. We just have to hit the transmit button and go for it. So if anyone needs anything from me, feel free to reach out. We have our web forms up. You can call me, you can email me, whatever is convenient for you, and we'll go from there. Other than that, have a great Saturday, everybody, and we'll talk to you in a couple of weeks.
Thanks.
Bye, guys.